What if the biggest defeat of the war in Ukraine has already happened and it didn't take place on the battlefield? Because for years Russian state media has repeated the same promise. Victory is inevitable, the West will be pushed back and Russia will rise again as a great power, and President Vladimir Putin keeps saying that the war will only end once Russia achieved all its strategic goals. But here is the uncomfortable question that almost nobody in Moscow wants to ask. What if those goals are already impossible to achieve? And today we are not looking at the front line, we are not looking at maps or daily battle updates. Instead, we are looking at the war from a strategic point of view. Because when you step back and look at the bigger picture, a very different story appears. A story that suggests that Russia may have already lost the war in Ukraine, no matter what happens next on the ground in Ukraine. Hi, my name is Alexander Korton. I'm a strategic analyst and media manager from Austria, and I'm also the founder of the German YouTube channel Geopol. And today we want to talk about why the Russian Federation has already lost the war on Ukraine. But to understand this argument, we need to go back almost 200 years to the Prussian military thinker Karl von Clausewitz. Because Clausewitz argued that war is never fought for its own sake, war is simply politics continued by other means. In simple terms, countries do not fight wars just to win battles, they fight wars to achieve political goals. And so the real question in Ukraine is not who controls which village today, the real question is whether Russia has achieved the political goals that led to this invasion in the first place. And since 2022, the Kremlin has been very clear about its objectives. Because Russia wanted to pull Ukraine back into its sphere of influence, it wanted to stop Ukraine moving closer to the West, and it wanted Ukraine to stay neutral and weak. It also wanted to limit NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, and it wanted Russia to be treated as a global great power again. And these goals are often described with slogans like demilitarization, denazification and neutrality. But when we compare these goals with reality in 2026, something remarkable becomes clear. Because Russia has not only failed to achieve these goals, in many ways it has achieved the exact opposite. And one of Moscow's biggest fears has always been Western-aligned Ukraine with a strong military directly on Russia's border. And ironically, that is exactly what the invasion created. Because before 2014, Ukraine's army was small, underfunded and poorly equipped. And today it is one of the largest and most battle-experienced armies in Europe, and Ukraine now produces drones and missiles and ballistic missiles at home, and it operates modern Western air defense systems, and European countries are delivering advanced fighter jets and weapons that would have been unthinkable before 2022. So instead of bringing Ukraine back into Russia's orbit, the invasion created a deeply hostile neighbor that will remain heavily armored for decades, and the change is not only military, it is political and cultural as well. Because before the full-scale invasion, public opinion in Ukraine was divided about joining NATO. Many Ukrainians supported neutrality, but today polls reported by Ukrainian and international media show overwhelming support for joining the NATO and the European Union. So Putin wanted to stop Ukraine from moving west, and instead he accelerated the process dramatically. But the consequences go far beyond Ukraine. Before the invasion, Moscow demanded that NATO roll back its expansion and return to its 1997 borders. That would have meant removing NATO protection from many Eastern European countries, just like Poland, the Baltic states or Romania as well. But what happened instead was the biggest NATO expansion in decades. And historically neutral countries like Finland and Sweden joined the North Atlantic Alliance, and overnight NATO's border with Russia doubled in length, and security analysts from the Atlantic Council and other institutions have pointed out how dramatically this strengthens deterrence in Northern Europe. So the strategic balance in the region has changed permanently. So instead of weakening or destroying NATO, Putin has brought the European NATO back to life. And there is another effect that is even bigger, because for decades many European countries reduced military spending, but that era is over, because since 2022 defense budgets across Europe have increased sharply. Countries like Germany, France and Poland are investing heavily in new weapons, larger armies and stronger defense industries. So Europe is becoming more military capable, specifically because of Russia's invasion. Putin wanted fewer NATO weapons near Russia's border, and instead Europe is rearming faster at any point since the Cold War. But another major goal of the Kremlin was restoring Russia's status as a global great power. But the war has revealed serious limits to Russian influence around the world. Because Moscow has struggled immensely to support allies and maintain influence in several regions. For example, look at the wars in Armenia, in Syria, in Iran or in Venezuela. All allies of the Russian Federation, and all those regimes get overthrown from Western countries or the people within the country, and Russia can't do nothing about it. And at the same time, Russia's relationship with China has changed dramatically as well, because President Xi Jinping leads a country with much larger economy and global reach, and the power balance between Moscow and Beijing now clearly favors China. So Russia increasingly looks like the junior partner in that relationship, and Vladimir Putin has to do whatever Xi Jinping says. And even political uncertainty in the United States has pushed Europe to become more independent, and the possibility of reduced US commitment under leaders like Donald Trump has encouraged European countries to cooperate more closely on defense and security. So the result is a Europe that is more united and more military prepared than before the war. So not just Vladimir Putin played a big role in strengthening the European NATO, but also the politics of Donald J. Trump. And when you now compare Russia's original goals with today's reality, the contrast is striking, because Ukraine is closer to the West than ever before. NATO is larger and stronger, Europe is rearming, and Russia is more isolated and more dependent on China. From a Clausewitz perspective, this is a devastating strategic outcome, because if war is politics by other means, failing to achieve political goals means failing at war. And this view is not only coming from analysts. It is being said openly by European leaders, like the Finnish President Alexander Stubb recently summarized the situation in very direct words, and this is a quote you can read now on the screen yourself. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian. It became European. He wanted to prevent NATO enlargement. He got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep our defense spending low, and now it is rising to 5%. When the war started, Russia had taken 12% of Ukrainian territory. That was 12 years ago. Since then 8%, in the last 2 years 1%. In December Ukraine killed 34,000 Russian soldiers. They could not replace them. I say to Russia, just keep going, and at the end of the day you will surely win this war. And those words capture the paradox of the war. The longer it continues, the more permanent the strategic changes become. This does not mean the war is over, it does not mean the fighting will end soon, and it certainly does not reduce the human cost of the conflict. But when we step back and look at the bigger picture, the geopolitical landscape has already changed in ways that may be impossible for Russia to reverse. And even if the Russian army captures more territory, even if the frontline shifts, the strategic environment around the Russian Federation has already transformed. And that of course leaves us with the final question. Can a country win battles but lose the future? In Russia's case, this might be the case. But what do you think? Has Russia already lost the war strategically, or is this conclusion too early? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the geopolitical perspective of the Russian Federation, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel Geopol Global. Otherwise, I will end the video here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.